Coming up in this episode of In Clear Focus.
We are always looking through a certain lens when we look at things. When you're analyzing different people, for example, and what their idea of the future is, that really also shows you the ideologies and the belief systems that are behind that.
You're listening to In Clear Focus, fresh perspectives on the business of advertising, produced weekly by Big Eye. Hello, I'm your host, Adrian Tennant, VP of Insights at Big Eye, a full-service, audience-focused creative agency. We're based in Orlando, Florida, serving clients across the United States and beyond. Thank you for joining us. In the introduction to her 2016 book, The Signals Are Talking, futurist Amy Webb writes, "The future doesn't simply arrive fully formed overnight, but emerges step by step. It first appears at seemingly random points around the fringe of society, never in the mainstream. Over time, they fit into patterns and come into focus as a full-blown trend, a convergence of multiple points that reveal a direction or tendency, a force that combines some human need and new enabling technology that will shape the future." The fates of companies including Kodak, Blockbuster, Circuit City and RIM, creator of the BlackBerry, illustrate what happens when corporations fail to identify signals that point the way to future consumers' needs and behaviors. Organizations that can see trends early enough to take action have a first-mover advantage, informing and shaping new markets. Our guest today is an expert in identifying and interpreting those signals that become trends. Thomas Klaffke is head of research for the Amsterdam-based firm TrendWatching, where he leads a team responsible for mapping out global, meaningful consumer trends and insights. Thomas previously worked as an innovation and foresights consultant for companies in Germany and South Africa. Today, Thomas is also the head of TrendWatching's sister company, Business of Purpose, where he's creating a platform for purpose-driven business professionals. To talk about identifying trends and translating them into innovative, purposeful products and services, Thomas is joining us today from his home office in Berlin, Germany. Thomas, welcome to In Clear Focus.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Happy to be here. Excited to talk with you.
TrendWatching was founded in Amsterdam 20 years ago. Could you tell us a little bit about what TrendWatching does and the types of clients you serve?
Sure. So TrendWatching is basically a trends intelligence firm. So our mission is to guide, inspire, but also empower business professionals to bring to market sustainable and inclusive innovations that benefit all. And we do that really by turning trends into meaningful opportunities. So right now we have around 100,000 people that are receiving our free content that you can see on the website, but also for our newsletters and so on. We have a few thousands on social media as well. And we have around 800 clients that are using our premium platforms where we constantly every week add new innovations, new trends and reports and so on. That's basically all of the content that we're producing that our clients have access to, including our individual analysts.
So Thomas, what's the split roughly between direct clients and agencies like ourselves?
Yeah, we have around 40% agencies that are using especially like premium products, for example, like TBWA or Ogilvy that are using that. And then we have around 45% of bigger brands or corporates. So for example, we have Danone, we have Google, Philips, these bigger companies and well-known brands. And we have, of course, then also some smaller companies. And the last bit is NGOs or nonprofit organizations. We have UNICEF, for example.
Thomas, you're the head of research at TrendWatching. What does your role entail?
Yeah, that's right. That means that I'm basically responsible for all things regarding our research system. So we bring out lots of content on a daily basis. So we need a really strong research system that covers everything, that really funnels in all of the content needs that we have. So a year ago, we started building a new research system that has basically three elements. One of them is our internal team. So we spot interesting innovations, trend signals, and so on internally. And we actually also integrate people that are not in our core content team, but also sales unit or in operations, because we just also want to create that kind of innovation enthusiastic culture. And then the second element here is our insights community, which is called Twin. TrendWatching's Insights Network. And here we have around 800 people from all around the world that are either also working within the trend industry or that are just interested in that. And they are sharing basically on an online platform all of the interesting innovations that they can find, interesting trends, all sorts of signals. And they're sharing that with themselves and also, of course, with us. And we're basically tapping into that pool of that community as well. And then the third one, which is the most important one, is that we're also tracking websites, blogs, newsletters ourselves, partly with third-party tools, but using some kind of algorithms, a little bit of AI that helps us filter through all of the noise. So we're tracking around 2,000 to 3,000 sources. And then we're kind of using that also to catalog all the different things that we get in. And I am responsible for that part of the company, basically, before it then gets to in the analysis, where I also play a role, of course.
Thomas, how do you characterize a trend?
Yeah, so the three elements that I think are always really important when it comes to trends is guidance. So a trend should give you guidance with regards to future and what is to come in the coming years. The second element is inspiration, I think. So you should get inspired by that trend. It should kind of trigger new ideas, new thinking, basically. And the last one, I think, is usefulness. So you should be able to kind of directly get some value out of that trend in terms of building a new product or it helping you change or improve your strategy, things like that. And at TrendWatching, we always try to have a good balance of these three elements. And we recently also introduced for us a new element, which is impact, which is really about building a better world through trend-driven innovation, basically. Yeah.
In the context of trends, what kinds of timelines are you typically most concerned with? Are you looking at trends that could have an impact within, say, the next 12 months, 1 to 5 years, or 5 to 10 years, or even further out?
Yeah, so most of the trends that we also kind of release like for our website or that we release on a very frequent basis are trends that are, in terms of timeline, valid for like the next 2 to 3 years, I would say. So it's kind of like a medium range. Internally, we call them sub-trends, basically. And we have another level, which is something that we're actually currently working on and updating, which we call mega trends, which are the bigger consumer shifts that are, in terms of timeline, like 5 to 10 years or so. And then we have another categorization, which we call drivers of change, which are the major shifts, basically. So here it's more kind of climate change, for example, or urbanization. So these bigger topics that are influencing kind of life in the 21st century, you could say.
TrendWatching's innovation-led approach is quite different from traditional market research. To anticipate what people will want next, you believe rather than surveying customers, it's actually more productive to look at what businesses are doing in response to consumers. Can you explain why?
Yeah, there are a couple of things to that. So there's one quote that I like to share always by William Gibson, a sci-fi writer, which is the future's already out there. It's just not evenly distributed. So, nowadays with the internet, with social media, with the whole information flood that we have, basically, I think there's just so much happening out there, especially also with the entrepreneurial era. You have so many new startups popping up all around the world. I think if you're really looking, and this is what we're doing, we're really looking at the global scale, you will find interesting things everywhere, like interesting innovations that are already on the market or are making it to the market, are about to be on the market. So that is one element. And then the other thing that connects to these two elements that I mentioned earlier that make good trends, I think, which is inspiration and usefulness. So when you look at trends with the lens of lots of different innovations, you immediately get lots of cool ideas as well. You could say that everything is a remix. Creativity is not something that just, comes out of nothing. I think it's always good to have a couple of pillars or different kind of signals where you can look at that can inspire you with new ideas. And usefulness is the other thing. Like if these products, if we can showcase our clients that there are already companies out there that are bringing that to market, there are already people working on this at least, or working on kind of aspects of that trend. And that, tells them that there's really something there and that gives them a little bit more proof maybe also.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about how you identify trends and implement them. Could you explain your framework for purpose-driven innovation?
Sure, yeah. There is a little bit of a story to that, I have to say, because at TrendWatching, we actually developed our older methodology called trend-driven innovation in around 2014-15. There's also a book about it. But all of that thinking is based on the idea of the expectation economy. So really people want more things, different things. They desire new stuff. And if you look at it more critically from today's perspective, it is maybe more based on a sort of carefree consumerism ideology and a constant pursuit of growth, which in today's world might not be so fitting anymore. And throughout the last couple of years, what we've seen, like actually using that trend-driven innovation methodology, is that we're seeing a move more towards what we call the purpose economy. So really an economy that are businesses that solve the big problems that we have. So we're in the midst of evolving our old methodology, our old framework with this new thinking. And that's why we call it purpose-driven innovation methodology. And the idea here is that you still have, on the one hand, 3 pillars that we look at. One is, as you were already saying, as we're quite innovation-led, is innovations. Then we look at what we call basic human needs. So what kind of basic human needs is this innovation really satisfying? Because these basic human needs are never changing. They're quite certain. It's something. So as an example, you have like a convenience there or safety. It's very general kind of principles. And the third pillar is drivers of change. So these big major shifts that are happening, like urbanization or climate change. So we bring these 3 things together, drivers of change, the innovations, and the basic human needs. And out of that, we look at what are some consumer expectations that are emerging from that. So for example, you could ask yourself like, okay, if consumers are using this product, are seeing this ad, what would they expect from other companies after that? So this is kind of the questions that we ask. And the new framework that we add to that is the impact bit, basically. And here we're using 2 kind of things that are one of them is quite known, which is the UN SDGs, UN Sustainable Development Goals, these 17 goals for sustainable development in the world, that we're using as basically like a purpose filter. So on the one hand, we're mostly looking at innovations that relate to these 17 UN SDGs and are then looking at all of these other elements. And on the other hand, we also use another framework called the 8 sustainability principles. It's from a bigger work of a Swedish scientist and sustainability expert called Carl-Henrik Robert, which is called the natural step framework. And he talks about these 8 sustainability principles that are basically rules that you have to abide by in order to provide sustainable innovations or bring sustainable innovations to the market. And we use those basically as a filter when we teach our clients our methodology and when we go from looking at trends and turning them into innovations or into opportunities. And these principles are, or these rules, you could say, for example, don't extract from the earth, don't produce harmful substances, don't degrade nature, don't overwork people, everyone's voice should matter, help people to self-develop, don't discriminate, and celebrate diversity. Now, of course, you won't find a lot of innovations right now that really check all of those boxes, of course. This is also not what we want to do. Like, we don't want to completely say that we have these rules, we have these UN SDGs, and that's where we should focus on totally. But we're using it more as like a mental exercise to think differently about what we're doing and what the impact of our actions will have. And just doing that already helps you come up with, I think, more creative ideas also, but most importantly, ideas that are really fitting to, I think, today's world and to this purpose economy.
Let's take a short break. We'll be right back after these messages.
I'm Sandra Marshall, VP of Client Services at Big Eye. Every week, In Clear Focus addresses topics that impact our work as advertising professionals. At Big Eye, we always put audiences first. For every engagement, we're committed not just to understanding our clients' business challenges, but also learning about their prospects and customers' attitudes, behaviors, and motivations. These insights inform our strategy and collectively inspire the account, creative, media, and analytics teams working on our clients' projects. If you'd like to put Big Eye's audience-focused consumer insights to work for your brand, please contact us. Email info@bigeyeagency.com. Big Eye, reaching the right people in the right place at the right time.
How do you identify?
Female,
male,
gender fluid,
cisgender, genderqueer,
non-binary,
transfeminine.
Society is constantly changing and evolving. To understand how Americans feel about gender identity and expression, Big Eye undertook a national study involving over 2,000 adult consumers. Over half of those aged 18 to 39 believe that traditional binary labels of male and female are outdated and instead see gender as a spectrum. Our exclusive report, Gender Beyond the Binary, reveals how beliefs across different generations influence the purchase of toys, clothes, and consumer packaged goods. To download the full report, go to bigeye.agency/gender.
Non-conforming, transgender, two-spirit,
transmasculine,
gender fluid.
Gender Beyond the Binary. Welcome back. I'm talking with Thomas Klaffke of TrendWatching. Thomas, in addition to being the head of research for TrendWatching, you also lead its sister organization, Business of Purpose. Why was the organization created and what does it do in relation to TrendWatching?
Yes, exactly. So Business of Purpose is basically our sister brand. It is mainly right now focused on building a community of purpose-driven business professionals. We currently have more than 1,200 members from all around the world, over 60 countries. And we're getting together also in an online space, just sharing insights about purpose-driven business. The idea behind that was that we saw this move to this purpose economy, but we also saw that it's still quite a lonely journey for lots of business professionals in that field. The status quo of business is, I think, still not fully aware of that maybe, or it's just kind of waking up to those ideas. And we just wanted to create a space for people that are interested in this to exchange new knowledge and ideas. So what we have, is this community where we also organize events and things like that. And then we have a monthly newsletter and a podcast where we discuss interesting new purpose-driven business practices, also with companies that are doing things a little bit differently.
Over the past decade, many new brands have adopted a direct-to-consumer business model rather than seeking shelf space on retailers' shelves via traditional distribution. Due to lockdowns as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, many consumers were forced to purchase essential and non-essential goods online. In response, we've seen more retailers implement omni-channel solutions, integrating online ordering with collection in store or curbside pickup. Thomas, what do you foresee the evolution of retailing looking like over the next few years? And are there any emerging trends that point us toward interesting scenarios?
So retail is an interesting space right now, I would say, because there's a lot of things that have been accelerated through COVID. Like you mentioned, for example, online shopping, of course, is a big one. And it is, of course, now interesting to see how things will pan out once people have more opportunity again to go out and shop. But I think a couple of things that we'll definitely see over the coming years that have definitely kind of changed are that you have a lot of smaller D2C brands that are gaining more leverage over the bigger brands. So we will see, I think, a lot more kind of collaboration and also acquisitions from bigger brands with smaller brands. Then I think small offline retailers will actually move even more online. This is something that you've seen a lot already, probably like in what you could call like developed countries, but it's actually a much bigger trend in developing countries where you have lots of these, very offline mom and pop shops, corner shops, convenience stores, where we're seeing lots of innovations from Latin America, for example, but also Southeast Asia, where there's new startups helping them go online, basically. So that is, I think, a big move that is coming from in these regions, at least. Then also maybe a little bit more in Europe or in the US, North America, you'll see, I think, a lot more within last mile innovations. So whether it's faster delivery, whether it's automated vending machines or kiosks, a new way of picking up your packages. Also, autonomous delivery methods, I think, have seen some surge and more investments over the last couple of months. So I think two other kind of smaller trends within that are ghost kitchens, which are restaurants that basically don't have any seating. You can order food from, and you have the same thing also for groceries, which are called dark stores. Yeah. One thing here is it's kind of split in between carefree consumerism and sustainable or conscious consumerism. And so I think on the one hand, we, of course, really like the new convenience that these innovations bring with them, all these new trends. But on the other hand, it also generates more packaging waste, for example. So I think there we'll also see some sort of new trends happening, whether it's reusable packaging or kind of biodegradable packaging. I think there's a lot happening in those spaces, which hasn't really come out yet. It hasn't come into mainstream, but also as government regulations are shifting in the EU, they just banned single-use plastics just, I think, a few days ago. So I think we will see a move there, quite soon. Maybe two more things. One is that as you see more retailers going online, I think you'll also get more and more kind of niche and curated online stores and shopping communities, because it's the kind of acceleration created a lot of supply of new kind of online retail. And now we are going again into a phase where there's curation happening, where people are basically overwhelmed by what is out there. And you're already seeing what we call kind of niche Amazons that are focusing on certain consumer types or certain niche markets, things like that. And in the offline sphere, I think people would just demand more from going to a store. I think the service just has to pick up and be better. And one thing is a trend that we released just recently called local change makers, which is all about bigger retailers or bigger brands collaborating with local stores on the ground. This is all kind of triggered by this new way of doing retail, but it is also triggered by a big trend that we call authenticity, or becoming more authentic brand. And so bigger brands are trying to collaborate with smaller companies, organizations, and communities on the ground, and are using their networks to also ship their goods or sell their services, as it's much more authentic for a global brand to collaborate with some smaller, more local companies that really know what it's like to be on the ground there.
Another area of our lives that has been affected by COVID is the increased amount of working from home among people who have the types of jobs that can be done remotely. What might some of the longer term impacts be for traditional office spaces and commuting?
Yeah, this is one of the trends that I like most, because it's, I think, one of the biggest shifts that COVID has triggered. And there's just so much happening in the space right now. It's super interesting to watch. But yeah, I actually brought a couple of just signals that we usually also look at that are really showcasing the impact of this. So just recently, for example, half of London firms planned for home working 5 days a week. 4 million Americans quit their jobs in April, which is a 20-year record. There was a recent Monster.com survey where 95% said they are considering quitting their jobs. Japan recently proposed a 4-day work week. This person called Mark Andreessen, who's a very well-known investor in the US, and he said that the remote work trend might be bigger than the internet. And yeah, major tech companies have also introduced, of course, kind of home working stuff. And those who want people to go back, like Apple, received some backlash. So there's definitely a lot happening here. And I think especially also when it comes to younger generations, you see a shift in terms of employee leverage against employers. This is all not only kind of influenced by remote work. There's also some other things that have been happening the last couple of years that are coming together, basically. So one would be employee activism. We've seen a rise of that also even before COVID when it comes to diversity stuff or inclusion, Black Lives Matter movement and so on. Then we, of course, have more and more of the boomer generation being replaced by millennials and Gen Z at the workplace, just naturally as people get older. as we have younger people just being in these leading positions. Then I think the move towards a more purpose-driven economy, I think there's also, especially among younger people, a growing feeling that hard work might not really lead to a fulfilled life as promised. There's generally an increasing distrust in institutions in general. And then you, of course, also have increased burnout, mental health, destigmatization of mental health, and all of that. And for especially also, again, younger people, kind of a future anxiety. This isn't the last crisis that we will face. There will also be other crises coming in the future. So I think all of these things are basically coming together and are really leading to one of the biggest shifts that COVID has triggered. So I think what we'll see is more hybrid and remote work, and I think it will become quite established. But it also has some other long-term implications in terms of a new war for talents. Now, of course, anyone from anywhere in the world could get potentially certain jobs. So there's a lot of potential opportunities for people living in an area where they don't really have access to these high-paying or interesting jobs, but might have the skills. And I think there's also new competition in terms of like new perks at work and new kind of workplace well-being stuff. We see an emergence of so-called third spaces. So these are kind of co-working spaces, cafes for working, different workshop spaces, basically office spaces that are geared towards specific tasks that you have. For example, creative work, for example, for like deep work, alone work, for socially engaging with others and things like that. And then one thing that we've also seen already over the last couple of years emerge is the so-called creator economy, which I think has also now been triggered even more with remote work, as people, as you saw in these statistics, are thinking more about quitting their jobs, are potentially thinking more about going into kind of solo entrepreneurs stuff, or at least kind of starting like a side hustle or a small kind of passion project on the side. And if you can very quickly, basically, if you're working remotely and a new job is basically just a Slack workspace, another Microsoft login away, you could potentially also have many more jobs at the same time. So this is something that is called kind of fluid employment. So you're actually not anymore just employed by one company, but by a couple of different companies. I think that will also become more normal or more mainstream. Yeah, and I think ultimately, this is again, me, of course, being very, very biased with our business of purpose community and everything. But I think it's all, again, also kind of hinting towards the purpose-driven business world, where companies that offer kind of a meaningful job, that offer a workplace where, you know, feel safe, where you're not burnt out and all of that, I think they will win within that because they will get more employee loyalty, and that will be something difficult or even like becoming increasingly difficult to establish in a remote work setting.
Thomas, you hold a Master of Arts degree in Future Studies. Could you tell us a little bit about what Future Studies is?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I studied Future Studies here in Berlin at the Free University of Berlin. And it's basically quite a philosophical degree. So in general, it's really about asking the question, what is the future really? What, if we talk about the future, are we talking about? So it really helped me kind of lay the foundations of what I'm doing right now. But it's a very philosophical kind of analysis of what we call the future, not only like in this field that I'm working in now, trend intelligence, but also just in our daily life.
In what kinds of ways did what you learned from Future Studies influence or inform the approach you take to research at TrendWatching and Business of Purpose?
Yeah, so one thing that you learn very early on in Future Studies is that the future does not exist. The concept of something that is coming, still not there yet, you cannot actually analyze this. So we're not actually analyzing the future. We're analyzing what we in Future Studies call present futures. So ideas of the future that are present right now, that are discussed within society and politics and so on. So you're looking at these present futures. That's the main thing of Future Studies, basically. And that also kind of has something within that, which is that we are basically all always looking through a certain frame, for a certain lens when we look at things. So that means that when you're analyzing different people, for example, different businesses, different kind of societal movements and what their idea of the future is, that really also shows you the ideologies and the belief systems that are behind that. And really shows you kind of also, the frameworks that they're using. And that makes you just more conscious about also your own frameworks and how the world is moving forward in general. And so it's really just about looking at what is being discussed and what is behind that. There's a lot of systems thinking, systems theory in that as well. And all of these things, I think, help you just to be more conscious about yourself and your own lenses. And just for me, especially when it comes to research, being able to find the exact right sources that I need for looking at certain things. If I'm interested in, for example, remote work and how this will pan out, I can potentially maybe better understand where I find these kind of communities or these people and companies that are looking at this right now and tap into their ideas and then combine that with what we have internally at TrendWatching as a bigger framework.
Science fiction became reality as Aircar, a flying car, completed a 35-minute flight between international airports in Slovakia last month. Using wings that fold away in less than 3 minutes and a propeller at its rear, Aircar has a BMW engine that runs off regular gas. Meanwhile, Michael Cole, who's the chief executive of the European operations at Hyundai, said that they've made some very significant investments in urban air mobility, suggesting that flying cars will be a reality by 2030. Thomas, based on what we've discussed today, do you think there's a real appetite among consumers for flying cars?
I think there's definitely an appetite. I mean, we've seen it in all of those science fiction movies, right? And a lot of things that we've seen in the early Star Trek movies, it's actually coming into reality at some point. I think, especially with flying cars, there are, of course, a lot of challenges also with it. There are interesting companies working on it. There's, I think, also here in Germany, we have, I think, 2 companies working on this. There's an interesting company in Singapore and China. They're also working on it. It's quite globally, something that is being discussed. But you also saw, I think, Uber had much more plans and then kind of scraped those plans again for their flying car or the electric air takeoff and landing plans. So I think it's going to be a little bit similar to what we've seen with autonomous vehicles, where you've also, I think, a few years ago, like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, have seen also a little bit more excitement than maybe in the last 2 years. So we're, I think, still in this kind of very, like in this excitement phase where lots of these companies are experimenting, bringing out new things, and you might also soon see the first commercial applications of that, I think, like in a very limited scale. Like you've seen also with autonomous vehicles, like there are Google cars or Teslas driving around. But I think it'll still take a while until, this becomes a bigger thing. I think what will be more interesting in the meantime is actually drones in terms of like delivery drones. Which is also connecting to what we've talked earlier about in terms of retail innovations. So last mile delivery solutions with drones and things like that, I think is a little bit more interesting right now. But of course, like we definitely keep our eyes on that. And we actually have an extra space for our clients where we look at the more out there niches that are emerging. And there we also have one which is looking at electric airplanes and also these flying cars concepts.
Thomas, if In Clear Focus listeners would like to learn more about you, TrendWatching, or Business of Purpose, where can they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I usually also post once or twice a week some interesting stuff on LinkedIn. So just follow me at Thomas Klaffke, that's KLAFFKE. And you can also find me, of course, through TrendWatching, trendwatching.com or businessofpurpose.com. Yeah, we have all our profiles on these pages. There's lots of ways where you can connect with us. Yeah, feel free to reach out, and happy to help anyone who's interested in this space.
Thomas, thank you very much for being our guest this week on In Clear Focus.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Adrian. It was a really nice conversation.
Coming up next time on In Clear Focus.
Who are the buyers? What is the job they're trying to accomplish? What is the information that we need to know internally that's going to help us reach these people? So a buyer persona to me is all of the information relevant to reaching your best buyer.
That's an interview with content strategist Adrienne Barnes next week on In Clear Focus. Thanks to my guest this week, Thomas Klaffke, Head of Research at TrendWatching and also Head of Business at Purpose. You'll find a transcript with links to the resources we discussed today on the In Clear Focus page at bigeyeagency.com under Insights. Just select Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider following us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening to In Clear Focus, produced by Big Eye. I've been your host, Adrian Tennant. Until next week, goodbye.